You may have heard musicians say there are no wrong notes, and that's true. But what does that really mean? It's a bit ambiguous. I mean, to me it means that any note can be made to sound intentional and musical if you just treat it the right way. But that still seems very broad and unspecific. So in this series, I'm going to try to show specific examples of how, in certain circumstances, any of the 12 chromatic notes can really sound good. And good is subjective, of course, but all you got to do is wiggle these notes around just the right way, and I think you'll be pleased and at least say, well, that has a musical function. I could see myself using that. For this first video, let's take a C major triad and stick each of the 12 chromatic notes under it as its bass note and see if we can make them all work. First, let's stick a C under there. Well, that certainly works. That's just C major in root position. Sounds nauseatingly consonant if you ask me, and it's going to be pretty easy to make notes from the key of C major make sense when you stick them under a C major chord, so no huge surprise there. But what if we stick a D flat or the flatted 2 under that C triad? Yikes, that's spicy, and to many ears that sounds like a wrong note. But what if you treat it like this? Now it sounds sort of like a flamenco melody. Or what if we treat this C with the D flat on the bottom like it's a C7 with a flat 9 on the bottom and resolve it down a fifth to F minor? The characteristics of these two examples make the D flat sound really intentional. Although it's still dissonant, it's part of a bigger story, so it sounds less like a stinkfest and more like an adventure. There's lots of other ways to justify that note. It's actually quite beautiful in many settings. But let's move on. Now we'll put a D on the bottom. That shouldn't be too hard because that's just the natural second of the C chord. And this chord's easy to play around with, especially if you stay in the key of C. It can also be moved in consonant structure to create a spacey kind of vibe. Next, we've got a real tricky one. We're going to put the E flat on the bottom of the C, which is its flat 3 or minor third, and you're sticking that against a major triad. Let's hear how that sounds. That one's hard to handle, but there's a way. What if we treat the E flat like it's the beginning of a symmetrical diminished scale that is half step, whole step? In other words, we go half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, all the way up the scale. Let's take a listen to that. It's still a bit spooky, but it's taking us somewhere. It's part of a story. And what if it takes us to this C sharp minor resolution? So a major triad with its minor third in there can actually resolve nicely up a half step to a minor chord, as in this example. I think this really goes to show how even the darkest, most despondent sounds in music can be used to elevate us to new heights. Next we get to C over E, which is just C over its major third, or C in first inversion, and that's a real snoozer. It's still just a C chord. Sounds good. Next we've got C over F, which is major with its fourth on the bottom. That's a nice spaceship sound. It reminds me of Mario Kart Racing for some reason, and it moves around really well. I think it's a similar sound to when we put D on the bottom of the C, or the 2 on the bottom. So a major triad with the 2 on the bottom, or a major triad with the 4 on the bottom, they'll both take you to what I would consider a similar vibe. Next we got a pretty special one, which is C with the G flat or F sharp on the bottom. So depending on how you look at it, it's a C triad with the sharp 11 or with the flat 5. Either way, you're going to get that Lydian sound, baby. You could also use this to get a Lydian flat 7 sound if you just play around with the flat 7 of the C chord too. Lydian flat 7 is just Lydian with a flat 7, and it happens to be the fourth mode of melodic minor. So you can use this to get that melodic minor vibe. Next we just got C over G, which is no big deal. It's just a C major chord in second inversion, and it sounds like a C major chord. But things get juicy again now when we add the A flat to the bottom, or the flat 6. When you have the major triad with the flat 6 on the bottom, that's actually a really nice melodic minor sound, specifically the third mode of melodic minor. So in this case, when we have C major with the A flat on the bottom, you're really hearing an A flat major 7 sharp 5 sound. And that works really well in F melodic minor. The A flat being the third degree of F melodic minor, which emphasizes the third mode of F melodic minor. So in other words, you can just play your F melodic minor scale over this chord. It sounds really good. Next up we got C over A, which is really friendly. It actually forms an A minor 7 chord. A being the root, C being the minor third, E being the fifth, and G being the flat 7, 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, minor 7 chord. And that sounds really good. It's easy to use. Next we're going to put the B flat on the bottom, which is the flat 7. So having a C triad with its flat 7 just makes it a C dominant 7 chord. And this is a particularly cool voicing of the C dominant 7 chord. One thing dominant 7th chords like to do is resolve down a fifth. So you could have this C7 chord go to F major or F minor. And you can just move the bass note around as if you're in C mixolydian or C Lydian flat 7 and have a good party with that. Finally, we get to C over B, which should just be a C major 7, since it's C, E, G, B. Those are the notes in a C major 7, and it literally is, but this is one of the most spicy ways to play a C major 7. There's a real spicy minor 9th there between the B on the bottom and the C root, but it is still C major 7 nonetheless. So if you resolve that note to any other note in the C major scale, that's going to be nice, and you can move it around, and it's real pretty. So generally speaking, all the roots that were in the key of C major were easy to use, and then the flat 7 was pretty easy to use, and the flat 5 or sharp 4, that was pretty easy to use, which really left us with 3 weirdos. We got the flat 2, but we could turn that into a phrygian dominant kind of flamenco sound. We got the flat 3, which was nice in a diminished scale kind of sound. And then we got the flat 6, which is happily melodic minor. That's all 12 notes, and they're all usable. We'll get into some more examples in the next video, but I would recommend playing around with all those roots and just making music with them. You play the C triad and you add any chromatic note and see if you can make all those dissonant moments resolve or bring you to some emotional point or some story element that you think is valuable in your music, therefore making the note intentional and musical.